How is it fair that Aussies who work in the private sector should cop all the pain, while those in the public sector still have job security and full pay? Aren't we supposed to be fairly sharing the load? G'day and welcome to episode 40 of The Other Side. I'm Damien Curry. This is our fourth episode of our new shorter but more frequent format of the show. Look for us every 3 days or so now, particularly on most Wednesdays and Saturdays. But just so you don't miss an episode, click the bell on the Discernible channel on YouTube so you get notified when our new content comes up. There'll also be more interview shows from The Other Side, and these will go as long as the interview takes and feels right. There was a headline in the Melbourne Age and the Sydney Morning Herald back in January that screamed Victoria's economic recovery to outstrip all other states as nation bounces back. You'd be forgiven for doing a double take on that one. Once you read the story though, you'd see all is not as it seemed from the headline. One of the big accounting and consulting firms, Deloitte, had issued a report saying Victoria could show the fastest recovery of any state or territory, that while the national economy would grow 4.4% in 2021, Victoria would grow 5.3%. It's a bit like how the guy who nearly died from COVID made a much bigger recovery than the guy who just got a mild cough. Victoria's big recovery comes off the back of a massive hit, and it can't really afford all these lockdowns they've been having lately. Make no mistake, the lockdowns are happening because Victoria hasn't got its Contact Tracing Act up to standard still. They need to lock down for the breathing room so contact tracers can get on top of the pace of the spread. We've heard that line before, like back in February when there was no lightning fast spread as predicted by Dan Andrews. Now we have the Delta strain, except epidemiologists tell us that it's not that much worse than the original strain, and the COVID vaccines are still working quite well against it. The other reason for the lockdown is that the federal government hasn't got quarantine sorted. We need purpose-built facilities outside major cities, not in their CBDs, near airports like at Avalon and Toowoomba. Aussies need to engage with the world again. A huge number of Australians live and work abroad, and millions more here at home need to go see people they love overseas and be able to come back safely for everyone's sake. As the Council of Small Business Australia CEO Peter Strong told Sky News, both federal and state governments have to take responsibility. National Cabinet is to blame for Victoria's latest lockdowns. And it's time for all governments to stop pointing fingers and lead.
And National Cabinet is to blame. It's all of them. They need to sit down and say, right, quarantine. And you were talking before about the essential. We need to get quarantine right. Look what's happened this time. We've got a virus and we've had a briefing from the health people at the federal level. This is incredibly contagious. We need to make sure it does not get out of quarantine. And that's how this has happened. We need to do that. And the third thing is we need to make sure that we've got business support when these lockdowns do happen. They're going to happen again. But National Cabinet, Peter, it's all of those people in National Cabinet. They're all pointing at each other, blaming each other at the moment. Get together and show leadership for the country.
Now, one way that we could make the burden on business and jobs a little lighter would be to ask public servants to chip in. How is it fair that Aussies who work in the private sector should cop all the pain, while those in the public sector still have job security and full pay? Aren't we supposed to be fairly sharing the load? Now, I'm not saying that healthcare workers who've been working overtime for the past year and are exhausted should be docked in their pay, but there are grounds for the entire administrative and managerial class of the public service to contribute by taking an across-the-board salary cut of, say, 25 to 50% for the duration of any lockdowns. It's much fairer that way, and not just financially, but also politically. Government employees, who generally are major Labor voters in the majority, don't seem to care so much about equity and fairness if it means they have to make a sacrifice like everyone who works in the private sector does. Also, given they all vote, Maybe it would mean we'd get fairer outcomes at elections and better government if everyone in the public sector also had to share the pain. Would they then be so pro-lockdowns and pro-Dan Andrews? The money could be put into a kitty and doled out to small and medium-sized businesses as a new kind of JobKeeper, so they can keep their staff employed. That would truly be sharing the load, wouldn't it? If you think I'm joking or being unfair, consider people like this bloke, who are shouldering the burden for everyone else. Matt Menno wrote on Twitter this week, "I run a gym studio. My wife and I had a baby 6 months ago. Congratulations. And her maternity leave pay has stopped. I have $4,000 rent to pay, mortgage, providing for my wife and kid with zero income. I am financially and mentally fried. Open gyms." So that's small businessman Matt Menno writing on Twitter this week. Hundreds of thousands of jobs were lost in Victoria between March and September last year, but more than 170,000 were created between September and December last year, so it bounced back a little bit. Unemployment peaked at 7.5%. By the year's end, it was at 6.5%. But this was not the result of good economic management. The economy was simply held together and jobs were saved by big spending by the federal government with JobKeeper and JobSeeker and by the Dan Andrews Labor government. They spent around $18 billion of their own, $18 billion more than they actually had to play with. To make matters worse, state government revenue was down sharply. It took in almost $10 billion less than it would have without the COVID lockdowns. So the extra spending by the Victorian government and the lower income combined took the state's total debt up to more than $61 billion. So two of the world's biggest credit ratings agencies downgraded Victoria from its AAA rating. One of them, Moody's, downgraded it by 2 levels because of a, quote, marked erosion in Victoria's governance of its public finances. Now, ratings downgrades can be a bit confusing. What they basically mean is that you've got to pay more interest to your lenders when you borrow money from them, because the rating is a credit rating, right? So if you're a higher risk, you pay more interest for the money. If your rating goes down, you're a higher risk. So losing your AAA credit rating is a big deal. Now, overall, thankfully, the Australian government level of debt, both federal and state, isn't too bad by world standards. But if interest rates rise, we are going to feel the pinch. Put it this way, if interest rates on the debt were 10% today and they went up to 11% tomorrow, so up by 1%, you wouldn't feel it too much on your interest bill. But interest rates are so low these days at around 1% or even less that if they go up to 2%, it'll mean your interest bill doubles. If they go up to 4%, it doubles again. And then we could really have a problem. The question of whether debt is good or bad, though, really comes down to the same as personal debt. Just think of it like that. I mean, are you maxing out the credit card on stuff that you're just consuming, like going out to dinner or buying flash cars or something? Or are you taking out a mortgage and investing in property or something else that's an asset that will actually go up in value over time to improve the economy of you and your family overall? Government's just the same. So the Victorian government says in its budget that it just released that it's going to spend $3.8 billion more on mental health in the coming year, and that's going to be paid for by more tax on businesses. Mental health is important, but can businesses handle more tax right now? Will that mean fewer jobs, higher unemployment, and therefore worse mental health and more pressure on mental health services? Talk about just feeding the machine's endless growth. The cost of the lockdowns to Victoria's economy overall, add another $1 billion every week. So maybe it'd be better to spend that mental health money on improving contact tracing and getting proper quarantine facilities in place. Paul Guerra is from the Victorian Chamber of Commerce, and he told Channel 10 during the last lockdown that business is hurting.
It's pretty sombre across the state today. Businesses have been dealing with cancellation of events. Some businesses closing for the next 7 days. and others wondering where their next paycheck is going to come through. It's impacted businesses in terms of what revenue are they going to be able to make over the next 7 days. And of course, the workers, which we know there's a shortage everywhere, where are they going to get their next dollar from as well? So, it was tough times. Look, the big question from business community across the state is, why are we back here again? The results today were encouraging. Only 4 cases, so hopefully it's only going to be the 7 days. But business doesn't care whether it's state or federal government. They just want support right now.
The federal government has given just under $50 billion to Victoria alone with JobKeeper, and the state has put in $10 billion so far. The feds seem to be reluctant to give Victoria any more money, all but suggesting back with the most recent lockdown that they need to sort this one out for themselves. But then they finally caved in a bit with the $500 payments to those in hotspots. Paul Guerra told Channel 10 that business is also being affected by the fear of future lockdowns. Nobody wants to invest in jobs. Nobody wants to invest in growth because they can't plan for the future because they don't know when this government's going to go, well, lock everything down again.
The reality of this virus is it's completely unpredictable, and that's why we'd like to see a purpose-built quarantine facility like the one at Howard Springs up and running. Let's stop talking about it. Trying to contain a highly contagious virus in a hotel environment doesn't work. The second part is let's get this vaccination program up and rocking. We've seen the last few days, people are coming out in droves to get vaccinated. That will help us keep it at bay. And the last thing, of course, is let's get the QR code check-in system working so that we can continue to have confidence in the contact tracing system. Those 3 things will mean that any threat of future lockdowns should diminish and diminish quickly.
That's the Victorian Chamber of Commerce's Paul Guerra speaking to Channel 10. Well, in the last episode, we brought you the story of little Cooper Onyett, who died at the Belfast Aquatics Pool in the southern Victorian town of Port Fairy while away on his first overnight school camp. His funeral was supposed to happen on the first day of Victoria's recent lockdown, and his family requested an exemption, which you think they'd get, right? Nope. They were denied by the bureaucrats in the Dan Andrews Labor government under the authority of Chief Health Officer Brett Sutton. You can check out our last episode or the one before for that. You got to stick to the rules, said Sutton. You got to have equity, as if there was a whole queue of people who'd lost children that week needing a funeral. And it was in Warrnambool. It wasn't even in Melbourne. In the past week, we've had the story of the Biloela family, whose youngest member, 3-year-old Tharnika, was flown to Perth Hospital from Christmas Island with pneumonia after apparently not being able to get adequate treatment on the island. Now, it's hard to call for bureaucrats to show heart and make some exceptions to the rule for one child and not another. So what's the actual background to the Biloela family's story? Well, Priya Nadarasa and her husband, Nades, were Tamil asylum seekers from Sri Lanka. They arrived separately, at different times, they didn't know each other, by boat in 2012 and 2013. Like many others, the pair fled Sri Lanka because of the persecution of the Tamil people. And this all happened under the last Labor government during a wave of more than 50,000 arrivals we had. Kevin Rudd later declared in July 2013 that all new arrivals would be sent offshore and never settled in Australia. But Priya and her husband were already here. They met, they got married, and they had 2 kids while living in Biloela. They were embraced by the local community while their claims for protection visas were being assessed. Now, in America, they'd be citizens by now because if you've got US-born children, they are automatically citizens, and the parents usually are given citizenship on the back of that. But Priya's kids, even though they were born in Australia, have no natural right to citizenship under Australian law. The federal government has spent $50 million of your money so far in detaining and attempting to deport the Biloela family. The family enjoy bipartisan support from people across the political spectrum. People like Barnaby Joyce, Julie Bishop, Michael McCormack and Tony Abbott and broadcaster Alan Jones on the Conservative and centre-right side are all supporting the Biloela family. The ABC reports that the Department of Home Affairs has repeatedly said that the family's case has been comprehensively assessed over many years, and they have consistently been found not to meet Australia's protection obligations. The family also had their appeal rejected by the Federal Circuit Court in June 2018. The judge in that case noted that Nades had returned to Sri Lanka on 3 occasions during the Civil War, and there was no evidence to suggest that his family, still living in Sri Lanka, was at any risk from authorities. The Civil War ended 12 years ago. The High Court then dismissed an application to review the case in May 2019. So, legally, technically, they don't have a right to stay, and they should probably be back home in Sri Lanka. But sometimes we need to show some heart, and lots of people want these guys to be allowed to remain here since they're so settled now in Biloela and the kids were born here. Isn't there another visa they could apply for? Can't they apply to just be regular immigrants with the community's full support? In other words, where there's a will inside the immigration department, there's usually a way. I don't think, after all that they've been through, that there's much risk of this family becoming poster children for the boat people industry in Sri Lanka and us seeing floods of boats coming over. They've hardly had an easy time of things. In any case, we need to decide whether we're a nation of kind people who look at a case like this and say, fair enough, technically, legally, no, but I reckon they've earned their right to stay. Versus being a nation that does everything rigidly by the book like a pack of robotic technocrats all the time. It's got to be fair, it's got to be equitable, equity, equity, equity. The case of little Cooper's funeral and this case are very different. You can reasonably argue that this family do have probably less moral right to be given an exemption. But I, for one, just don't feel good doing that any more than I would have in Cooper's case. Rules are made to be bent by common sense and good-heartedness because rules can never be perfect and never be universally applied in every single case. So you need common sense in government. You need good people with a good heart going, okay, in this case we're going to just make a little bit of an exemption without the media jumping on them going, oh, that's not fair to everybody else, you know. So I would have bent the rules for both Cooper and for this family. In any case, some pollies are making mileage out of the case and using it to villainise ScoMo and Peter Dutton. Yep, you guessed it. Christina, I want to be Prime Minister so bad, Keneally, who's the queen of the tacky, contrived publicity stunt, was back at it again. Somehow she's conveniently forgetting that it was Kevin Rudd and the Labor Party policy that started this mess. But hey, blame ScoMo, blame Dutton. It's what all the cool kids do these days.
She has been gravely ill now for some 2 weeks. She's been vomiting, she's had diarrhea, she's had a high fever, and her parents say that they could not get access to appropriate medical care, that she grew sicker and sicker, and now resulting in this emergency medical evacuation to Perth. It's heartbreaking, and her family, her parents must be so distressed. Any parent would be distressed when their young child is sick. But to think that you have to fight with security guards and government bureaucrats just to get your child to be able to be seen by a doctor, to think that she now has to be separated from her father and her sister and flown to Perth for this emergency medical treatment. This is beyond a shame. It's time for this sad, terrible saga to come to an end. This family has been through enough.
Excuse me, sorry. Labor's Christina Keneally there with yet another performance unlikely to win an Academy Award. I actually agree with almost everything she says there, but even when I agree with KK, I still feel like throwing up a little at the insincerity and the political opportunism. Maybe I'm just a grumpy old cynic. All right, stop being cheeky, Damien. We'll get back into a positive story to end on today. One of the most uplifting stories of the year, I think. It appeared in the Murdoch papers a little while back from journalists Sue and Levy. Kate Fitzgerald, a 38-year-old chief executive who'd been working long hours managing Victoria's COVID response, got told in October 2020 that she'd developed bowel cancer and needed immediate high-risk surgery for a tumour that was already the size of a cricket ball. There was a problem, however. Kate was 5 months pregnant. Doctors performed a miraculous 6-hour procedure where they removed Kate's womb, but with the umbilical cord still attached, operated on the tumour, then put the womb back. 3 months later, baby Ava was born. Ava is now 3 months old and thriving, and Kate's been able to have chemo and radiation treatment now that she's not pregnant anymore. Kate wants to put bowel cancer on the radar for everyone under 50 because the earlier it's detected, the better the chance of survival. And the survival chance is pretty good if you get it early. Unfortunately, bowel cancer rates have been rising in people under 50 for some reason, and it's the deadliest cancer for people aged 25 to 34. But there you go, a true little medical miracle in baby Ava. And that's it for the fourth of our new format, shorter and more regular episodes of The Other Side Australia. I'm Damien Curry. Please remember to click that subscribe button on all the platforms. There'll be another episode in a couple of days. And if you're following us on YouTube, click the bell so you'll get notified when we post our new content. Sign up for the Discernible crew at discernible.io. That's discernible with an A, and it's .io. I know it's weird, but that's what it is. And if you'd like to be added to our VIP WhatsApp group, all you got to do is email your WhatsApp number to us at theothersideost@gmail.com. Theothersideost@gmail.com. We then send you a link that you have to click on to opt in to the WhatsApp group. Okay, so theothersideost@gmail.com. Just send us your number and your WhatsApp number, and we'll send you that link. Okay, see you again soon. Take care.